Right now, somewhere near you, a bee is performing one of nature's most elegant dances, tracing figure eights in the air to tell her sisters exactly where to find the sweetest nectar. And that honey sitting in your kitchen cupboard, it could literally last forever. We found perfectly edible jars in ancient Egyptian tombs. Tonight on Midnight Deep Dive, we're exploring the surprisingly complex, wonderfully soothing world of bees. Let me know in the comments how your day went and what other seemingly mundane topics you'd like me to dive into next. Now pull up your coziest blanket and settle in. We're about to discover the secret world that buzzes quietly all around us, full of ancient wisdom and daily miracles you never knew were happening. The ancient world of bees. Let's start our journey by traveling back in time, not just a few decades or centuries, but 130 million years ago, to a world that would seem almost alien to us today. The continents were arranged differently, dinosaurs roamed the earth, and flowering plants were just beginning their spectacular takeover of the landscape. It was in this ancient world that one of nature's most remarkable transformations began to unfold. Imagine a prehistoric wasp, sleek, predatory, hunting other insects with single-minded determination. These early wasps were carnivores through and through, their lives dedicated to the hunt. But something extraordinary happened as the first flowers began to bloom across the ancient landscape. Some of these wasps began to notice something sweet, something irresistible about these new colorful structures. Perhaps it started accidentally, a wasp investigating a flower for prey, only to discover the energy-rich nectar waiting inside. Over millions of years, these visits became less accidental and more intentional. The wasps' bodies began to change, their smooth, sleek forms developing the fuzzy, branched hairs we associate with bees today. These hairs weren't just for show. They were perfectly designed to collect pollen, turning these former predators into the world's most efficient pollinators. It's one of evolution's most beautiful stories, the transformation from hunter to helper, from carnivore to vegetarian, from destroyer to creator. And we know this story not just from fossil evidence, but from the most enchanting time capsules nature has ever created. Deep in amber deposits around the world, scientists have discovered bees frozen in time, their delicate wings still outstretched, their fuzzy bodies perfectly preserved, sometimes even with pollen still clinging to their legs. These amber tombs tell us that 100 million years ago, bees were already remarkably similar to the ones buzzing in your garden today. One particularly stunning specimen from Myanmar amber shows a bee so well preserved that scientists can see individual hairs on its body, the compound structure of its eyes, even the pollen grains it was carrying on its final flight. It's almost overwhelming to think about this tiny creature, going about its daily routine on a morning 100 million years ago, suddenly trapped in tree resin, preserved for us to marvel at today. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this ancient story is how bees and flowering plants essentially created each other. As bees evolved better ways to collect nectar and pollen, flowers evolved more attractive ways to present their rewards. It became an arms race of beauty, flowers developing brighter colors, sweeter scents, more intricate shapes, while bees developed keener eyesight, longer tongues, and more sophisticated pollen-carrying equipment. This coevolution created the world we know today. Every time you walk through a meadow full of wildflowers, every time you bite into a fruit, every time you smell the intoxicating perfume of blooming trees, you're experiencing the results of this 130 million year partnership. The bees didn't just change themselves. They changed the entire planet, turning it from a world dominated by green, wind-pollinated plants into the riot of color and fragrance we call home. The secret architecture of the hive. Now let's step inside one of nature's most sophisticated architectural marvels. If you've ever looked at a honeycomb, you've probably admired its perfect geometric beauty, those flawless hexagons fitting together without a single gap or overlap. But what you might not realize is that you're looking at a mathematical solution that took human mathematicians centuries to prove was optimal. The hexagon shape isn't arbitrary. It's the most efficient way to divide a plane into equal areas using the least amount of material. Bees discovered this mathematical truth millions of years before humans even existed, and they put it to work in the most practical way imaginable. Each hexagonal cell in a comb uses exactly the right amount of precious beeswax while maximizing storage space. It's engineering perfection, created by creatures with brains smaller than sesame seeds. But the geometry is just the beginning. Step closer to a working hive on a warm summer day, and you'll notice something remarkable. Despite the chaos of thousands of bees coming and going, despite the varying temperatures outside, the inside of the hive maintains an almost constant temperature of exactly 35 degrees Celsius. This isn't coincidence. It's climate control that would make any modern building engineer envious. When the hive gets too warm, worker bees position themselves throughout the structure and begin fanning their wings in coordinated waves. They're not just moving air randomly. They create sophisticated ventilation, currents that draw cool air in through the bottom of the hive and push warm air out through the top. On especially hot days, some bees will even collect water and spread it throughout the hive, using evaporative cooling to bring temperatures down. When winter arrives and the outside world grows cold, the bees switch tactics entirely. They form what's called a winter cluster, thousands of bees huddling together in a living ball of warmth. The bees on the outside of this cluster shiver continuously, generating heat like tiny furnaces, while the bees on the inside stay warm and cozy. Every few hours, they rotate positions, ensuring that no bee stays too long in the cold outer layer. It's a level of cooperation and self-sacrifice that's both humbling and inspiring. Throughout this elaborate hive, you'll also find another of the bees' architectural innovations, propolis, often called bee glue. This remarkable substance starts life as sticky resins from tree buds and bark, which bees collect and modify with their own enzymes. The result is nature's perfect antiseptic adhesive. Bees use propolis to seal cracks in their hive, to smooth rough surfaces, and most importantly, to create a sterile environment. Propolis has powerful antimicrobial properties, so powerful that ancient Egyptians used it for mummification, and modern research has confirmed its effectiveness against bacteria, viruses, and fungi. Inside the hive, this means that despite housing tens of thousands of individuals in close quarters, disease outbreaks are remarkably rare. The bees have essentially created a self-sterilizing city. Walking through this architectural wonder, you'd notice that nothing is left to chance. The corridors between combs are precisely bee-wide, what scientists call bee space. Too narrow, and bees can't pass each other. Too wide, and they'll build additional comb to fill the gap. The entrance is positioned and sized to optimize traffic flow while making the hive easier to defend. Storage areas are organized by function honey in the upper sections, where it's less likely to crystallize, pollen stores closer to the brood, where it's needed for feeding developing bees. It's a city that would make any urban planner weep with envy. No traffic jams, no waste, perfect climate control, and a population that works together with an efficiency that seems almost supernatural. And all of this, remember, is built in complete darkness by architects who have never seen a blueprint. A day in the life of the colony. Let me take you through a single day in this remarkable city, starting before dawn when the first pale light begins to filter through the entrance. The hive never truly sleeps, but there's definitely a rhythm to its activities, a daily pulse that's been beating steadily for millions of years. Our story begins with the queen, the beating heart of this entire operation. In the darkness of her royal chamber, surrounded by her retinue of attendants, she's already been working for hours. The queen's day starts early and never really ends. She's capable of laying up to 2,000 eggs daily during peak season, and each one requires her full attention. She moves across the comb with slow, deliberate grace, feeling each cell with her antennae to ensure it's clean and ready. When she finds a suitable cell, she backs her abdomen into it and deposits a single, pearl-white egg. This might seem like a simple process, but the queen is making complex decisions with each egg she lays. Worker egg or drone egg. The destiny of each new bee is determined by whether the queen releases sperm from her storage organs to fertilize the egg. Unfertilized eggs become male drones, while fertilized eggs become female workers. The queen somehow keeps track of the colony's needs, laying more worker eggs when the population is low, more drone eggs when it's time for reproduction. Around her, her attendant bees, all sterile females, work tirelessly to support their mother's efforts. They groom her constantly, feed her royal jelly, and spread her pheromones throughout the hive. These chemical messages are like a constant newsletter, telling every bee in the colony that all is well, that their queen is healthy and productive. As the sun rises and the first forager bees begin to stir, we can witness one of nature's most remarkable career systems. A worker bee's life is like a carefully choreographed dance through different professions, each one perfectly timed to the colony's needs and her own physical development. The youngest bees, just emerged from their cells with their soft, pale bodies still hardening, begin their careers as house bees. Their first job is cleaning. They meticulously polish empty cells, preparing them for new eggs or food storage. It might seem menial, but this cleaning is crucial for the health of the entire colony. After a few days, as their bodies mature and their glands develop, they graduate to nursing duty. Nurse bees have one of the most demanding jobs in the hive. They're responsible for feeding all the developing larvae, and this means producing different types of food for different ages and castes. For the first 3 days, all larvae receive royal jelly, a protein-rich secretion that the nurse bees produce in special glands in their heads. After that, future workers switch to a diet of honey and pollen, while future queens continue receiving royal jelly throughout their development. It's this extended royal jelly diet that transforms an ordinary female egg into a queen, one of the most dramatic examples of epigenetics in nature. As these nurse bees age, their wax glands begin to function, and they transition into the construction trades. Architect bees secrete pure white wax scales from glands on their abdomens, then chew these scales with enzymes from their saliva to make them pliable. Working in teams, they build the perfect hexagonal cells that form the backbone of their society. The precision is astounding. Each cell wall is exactly 0.073 millimeters thick, and the entire structure can support 25 times its own weight. But perhaps the most dramatic career change comes when a worker bee makes the transition from house bee to forager. This usually happens when she's about 3 weeks old, though the timing depends on the colony's needs. The transformation is remarkable. Her brain actually changes structure, developing enhanced memory and navigation abilities. Her vision sharpens, her sense of smell becomes more acute, and she develops an almost supernatural ability to navigate across vast distances. These forager bees are the adventurers of the colony, and their morning routine is a marvel of efficiency and communication. Before heading out on their first flight of the day, they gather around returning foragers who are performing the famous waggle dance. This isn't just random buzzing and movement. It's a precise language that conveys the distance, direction, and quality of food sources. A forager who's found a patch of flowers rich in nectar will perform a figure-8 dance on the vertical surface of the comb. The straight run in the middle of the figure-8 points toward the food source relative to the sun's position. The duration of this straight run indicates the distance, roughly 1 second for every kilometer. The vigor of the dance and the samples of nectar the dancer shares tell other bees about the quality of the find. It's like a GPS system combined with Yelp reviews, all communicated through interpretive dance in a dark hive. Bees following these directions can fly directly to food sources they've never visited before, sometimes several kilometers away, and find them with remarkable accuracy. Throughout the day, the hive buzzes with activity. Guard bees stationed at the entrance check every returning forager, using scent to distinguish colony members from potential intruders. Inside, other specialists tend to various tasks. Some bees ripen honey by fanning it to reduce water content. Others pack pollen into cells and cover it with a thin layer of honey to preserve it. Still others attend to ventilation duties. As evening approaches and the last foragers return home, the pace of activity gradually slows. But the hive never truly stops. Nurse bees continue tending larvae through the night. Guard bees maintain their vigil, and the quiet work of construction and maintenance continues in the darkness. It's a society that functions with a precision and dedication that seems almost too perfect to be real. Yet every day, in hives around the world, this ancient routine plays out exactly as it has for millions of years. The sensory world of bees. Now let's explore what it might be like to experience the world through a bee's senses. A world so different from our own that it's almost like visiting an alien planet. If you could somehow shrink down and ride along with a forager bee on her morning flight, you'd discover that the familiar landscape of your garden is transformed into something magical and strange. First, let's talk about how bees see. Their compound eyes contain thousands of individual lenses, each one capturing a slightly different angle of view. The result isn't the crisp, detailed vision we enjoy, but rather a mosaic of movement and pattern that's exquisitely sensitive to motion. A bee can detect the flicker of another bee's wings from remarkable distances, and she can track multiple moving objects simultaneously, crucial skills when navigating through a world full of swaying flowers and buzzing sisters. But the real revelation comes when we consider the colors bees can see. While we humans see the world in combinations of red, green, and blue, bees see in ultraviolet, blue, and green. This means that red flowers, which appear vibrant to us, look almost black to a bee. But flowers that appear plain white or yellow to us, they're painted with intricate ultraviolet patterns that serve as landing strips and nectar guides for their bee visitors. Imagine looking at a field of what appears to be simple yellow daisies, only to discover that each one is actually decorated with elaborate UV patterns. Bullseyes, stripes, and arrows, all pointing toward the flower's center where the nectar waits. It's like a hidden world of neon signs, invisible to us but blazingly obvious to bees. Some flowers even have UV patterns that change throughout the day, advertising when their nectar is freshest and most abundant. This ultraviolet vision serves another crucial purpose: navigation. Bees can see polarization patterns in the sky that are completely invisible to us. Even on cloudy days when the sun isn't visible, bees can determine its position by reading these polarization patterns. It's like having a built-in compass that works perfectly even when GPS would fail. But vision is just the beginning of their sensory superpowers. A bee's antennae are marvels of chemical detection, capable of identifying thousands of different scents and pheromones. When a forager lands on a flower, she's not just collecting nectar. She's analyzing its chemical signature with an accuracy that rivals our most sophisticated instruments. She can tell whether the flower has been recently visited by another bee, what species of plant it is, and even how much nectar it's likely to contain. These same antennae can detect the pheromones floating through the air around the hive, chemical messages that tell her about the queen's health, the colony's needs, and any potential dangers. It's like being plugged into a constant information network, receiving updates and instructions through scent alone. Perhaps most remarkably, bees can taste with their feet. When a forager lands on a flower, specialized receptors in her tarsi immediately begin analyzing the surface. She can tell whether the flower contains nectar before she even extends her tongue, and she can assess the quality of pollen without taking a single grain. Its efficiency taken to an almost absurd extreme. Imagine being able to taste your dinner just by stepping on the plate. Bees also have an extraordinary relationship with Earth's magnetic field. Scientists have discovered magnetite crystals in bee abdomens, tiny biological compasses that allow them to navigate using the planet's magnetic field lines. This ability helps explain how bees can find their way home across vast distances, even when familiar landmarks are obscured by weather or changes in the landscape. Their sense of time is equally impressive. Bees have internal clocks that are synchronized not just to the 24-hour day, but to the specific flowering patterns of their favorite plants. A forager can learn that a particular patch of flowers produces the most nectar between 10 a.m. and noon, and she'll time her visits accordingly. Some bees even adjust their internal clocks to account for the changing seasons, visiting flowers earlier in the day as summer progresses, and the morning becomes the optimal feeding time. Touch plays a crucial role too, especially inside the dark hive. Bees communicate through vibrations transmitted through the comb. They can hear the movements of sisters in distant parts of the colony through their feet. When a bee performs the waggle dance, part of her message is transmitted as vibrations that other bees feel through the comb structure. It's like a telegraph system built into the architecture of their home. During winter clustering, touch becomes even more important. The bees constantly monitor each other's temperature through physical contact, adjusting their positions in the cluster to ensure everyone stays warm. They can sense when a sister is becoming too cold and needs to move toward the warm center, or when someone has been generating heat too long and needs a break. All of these senses work together to create a picture of the world that's both alien and wonderful. A single bee experiences a rich, multi-layered reality full of chemical messages, magnetic fields, ultraviolet patterns, and vibrations that we can barely imagine. Yet somehow this sensory information is integrated into behaviors so precise and purposeful that they seem almost conscious. Flying alongside our hypothetical forager bee, you'd realize that she's not just randomly searching for flowers. She's reading the landscape like a book, following chemical trails, navigating by magnetic compasses and polarized light, timing her visits to coincide with peak nectar production. Every moment of her short life is guided by sensory information we can't even perceive, in service of a colony that depends entirely on her ability to decode the hidden messages in the world around her. The sweet science of honey. Let's follow that nectar from flower to jar, because the transformation of flower nectar into the honey on your breakfast table is one of nature's most elegant chemistry experiments. A process so refined that humans still can't replicate it perfectly despite centuries of trying. Our journey begins in the nectaries of flowers, those specialized glands that produce the sweet reward that makes the whole pollination system work. Nectar isn't just sugar water. It's a complex solution containing various sugars, amino acids, minerals, and enzymes, each flower species creating its own unique recipe. Apple blossoms produce nectar that's subtly different from cherry blossoms, which differs from wildflower nectar, which differs from clover nectar. These differences will eventually give us the wonderful variety of honey flavors we know and love. When our forager bee extends her long tongue into a flower, she's not just sucking up nectar like drinking through a straw. The nectar goes into her honey stomach, a special organ separate from her regular digestive tract. Think of it as a living fermentation vessel, where the real magic begins immediately. The moment that nectar enters her honey stomach, enzymes begin breaking down complex sugars into simpler ones, and her body begins adding enzymes that will eventually help preserve the final product. Here's where the story gets really interesting. Our forager doesn't just fly home and dump her cargo. The honey stomach can hold almost as much as the bee weighs, turning her into a tiny flying tanker truck. But the load affects her flight performance, so she has to carefully balance how much nectar to collect against her ability to make it back to the hive safely. It's a calculation that involves distance, wind conditions, her own energy levels, and the quality of the nectar source. Back at the hive, she transfers her precious cargo to a house bee through a process called trophallaxis. Essentially, she regurgitates the nectar and the house bee swallows it. This might sound unappetizing to us, but it's actually a crucial step in honey production. Each transfer adds more enzymes and continues the chemical transformation that turns nectar into honey. Sometimes the nectar is passed between several house bees before finding its way into a cell, and each transfer improves the final product. The house bees don't just dump this processed nectar into any available cell, they're strategic about placement. Honey intended for long-term storage goes into cells in the upper parts of the comb, where it's less likely to crystallize and more accessible during winter. They might also add more of their own enzymes, and even some pollen to create different grades of honey for different purposes. But here's the crucial part. Even after being placed in the comb, this isn't honey yet. It's still too high in water content and would ferment and spoil if left as is. So begins one of the most impressive examples of collective action in the natural world. Worker bees position themselves throughout the hive and begin fanning their wings, creating air currents that flow over the filled cells. They're literally freeze-drying the nectar using evaporation. This process can take days or even weeks, depending on humidity and temperature. The bees keep testing the moisture content, and when it drops below about 18%, they know it's ready. At this point, they cap each cell with a thin layer of wax, sealing the honey in its own perfect, sterile container. The honey that results from this process is a remarkable substance. It's supersaturated with sugars, so concentrated that bacteria can't survive in it. The low pH and the presence of hydrogen peroxide, produced by one of those bee enzymes, make it naturally antimicrobial. This is why honey never spoils. The jars found in Egyptian tombs weren't preserved by some ancient technique. Honey preserves itself. But not all honey is the same, and this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. The flavor, color, and properties of honey depend entirely on the flowers the bees visited. Clover honey is mild and light-colored, with a subtle sweetness that makes it perfect for everyday use. Wildflower honey varies from batch to batch, reflecting whatever happens to be blooming in the area. It might have notes of dandelion in spring, basswood in early summer, and asters in fall. Then there are the exotic varieties that honey enthusiasts seek out. Buckwheat honey is dark and robust, with an almost molasses-like complexity. Orange blossom honey captures the essence of citrus groves in bloom. Lavender honey carries the floral perfume of those purple fields. Eucalyptus honey has a distinctive medicinal tang. Each one is like a liquid postcard from a specific time and place. Some of the most prized honeys come from very specific sources. Tupelo honey, produced from the white blossoms of the tupelo tree in the southeastern United States, is so pure in fructose that it rarely crystallizes. Manuka honey from New Zealand comes from bees visiting the Manuka bush and contains unique compounds that give it exceptional antimicrobial properties. The crystallization process itself is fascinating. Over time, the glucose in honey begins to separate out and form crystals. This doesn't mean the honey has gone bad, it's just changing form. The speed and texture of crystallization depends on the sugar composition and temperature. Some honeys, like clover, crystallize quickly into fine, creamy crystals. Others, like acacia honey, might stay liquid for years. You can reverse crystallization by gentle heating, but many honey lovers prefer the crystallized form. Creamed honey that's been deliberately crystallized under controlled conditions has a smooth, spreadable texture that's perfect for toast and baking. And here's something that might change how you think about that jar in your pantry. The honey you're eating contains more than just processed nectar. It has trace amounts of pollen, which means it carries the genetic signatures of hundreds of different plants. It contains enzymes that are still active, minerals absorbed from the soil where the flowers grew, and aromatic compounds that reflect the entire ecosystem the bees called home. In a very real sense, honey is captured sunlight solar energy that was converted to plant sugars through photosynthesis, concentrated by flowers into nectar, and then further refined and preserved by bees into this golden elixir that can last forever. When you spread honey on your morning toast, you're tasting the essence of flowers that bloomed months ago, processed by creatures whose lives were entirely devoted to this ancient craft. Bees around the world. While honeybees might be the stars of our story so far, they're actually just one act in a much larger show. Around the world, there are over 20,000 species of bees, each one perfectly adapted to their local environment and the flowers they've co-evolved with. Let me take you on a tour of some of these remarkable creatures. A journey that will show you just how creative evolution can be when it comes to the art of being a bee. Let's start close to home with carpenter bees, those large, shiny black bees that you might have seen hovering around your deck or porch in late spring. At first glance, they might seem like flying tanks, big, loud, and somewhat intimidating. But watch one work, and you'll witness precision engineering that would make any craftsperson jealous. The female carpenter bee uses her powerful mandibles to excavate perfectly round tunnels in wood, creating galleries where she'll lay her eggs. These aren't random holes, they're architectural marvels, with the main tunnel running parallel to the grain of the wood and smaller chambers branching off at precise angles. Each chamber is stocked with a ball of pollen and nectar, and a single egg is placed on top. It's like creating individual nurseries, each one perfectly provisioned for a developing bee. The sound of a carpenter bee at work is unmistakable, a deep, methodical grinding as she chews through the wood fibers. She might work for hours to create a tunnel just a few inches long, removing each tiny wood particle and carrying it away from the construction site. The result is so perfectly cylindrical that it looks machine-made. Now let's travel north, where bumblebees reign supreme in cooler climates. These fuzzy, robust bees are like the marathon runners of the bee world, capable of flying in temperatures that would ground other species. Their secret weapon is their ability to shiver, using their flight muscles to generate heat before takeoff. On cold mornings when other insects are still sluggish, bumblebees are already out visiting flowers, their body temperature internally regulated to stay active. Bumblebee societies are annual affairs. Each colony lasts just one season. In spring, a lone queen who survived the winter starts from scratch, finding a suitable nest site, often an abandoned mouse burrow, and beginning to lay eggs. She incubates these first eggs with her own body heat, shivering to keep them warm. Once her first daughters emerge, they take over foraging duties while she focuses on egg-laying. By late summer, the colony might contain a few hundred bees. And then the whole cycle begins again, as new queens and males are produced for next year's reproduction. Bumblebees have another superpower: buzz pollination. Some flowers, like tomatoes and blueberries, keep their pollen locked inside tube-like structures that require a special technique to access. The bumblebee grabs onto the flower and vibrates her flight muscles at just the right frequency, around 400 beats per second, causing the flower to release its pollen in a visible cloud. It's like having a sonic key that opens flowers other bees can't access. But perhaps the most diverse and fascinating group of bees are the solitary species, the 90% of bee species that don't live in colonies at all. These are the quiet heroes of pollination, and they're everywhere once you know how to look for them. Take mason bees, for instance. These metallic-colored gems are master architects in their own right, but instead of building with wax, they work with mud. The female collects clay and chews it into workable mortar, then constructs individual chambers in hollow stems, nail holes, or specially designed bee houses. Each chamber is stocked with pollen and nectar, sealed with a mud cap, and contains a single egg. The result looks like a tiny apartment building, with each unit perfectly provisioned for its single occupant. Mason bees are phenomenally efficient pollinators. A single female can do the pollination work of hundreds of honeybees because she's not as tidy about her pollen collecting. Where honeybees pack pollen carefully into specialized baskets, mason bees carry it loose on their fuzzy bellies, allowing much more to brush off onto the flowers they visit. Leafcutter bees take a completely different approach to construction. The females use their sharp mandibles to cut precise circles and ovals from rose leaves, grape leaves, or other suitable vegetation. They carry these pieces back to their nests and use them like wallpaper, lining cylindrical holes with overlapping leaf pieces to create waterproof chambers. Each chamber gets its pollen provision and egg, then is sealed with more leaf pieces. The precision of their cuts is so perfect that early naturalists thought the leaf damage was caused by some kind of natural phenomenon. It seemed too neat to be made by an insect. In the American Southwest, you'll find specialist bees that have co-evolved with specific cacti and desert plants. Some have learned to time their emergence precisely with the brief, spectacular blooms of desert flowers. They might spend 11 months of the year as pupae underground, waiting for those few weeks when their chosen flowers paint the desert with color. The tiny sweat bees, so called because they're attracted to the salt in human perspiration, are often metallic green or blue, looking like flying jewels as they work flowers in your garden. Despite their small size, they're important pollinators, especially for smaller wildflowers that might be overlooked by larger bees. Travel to the tropics, and you'll discover an entire world of stingless bees. These tiny creatures live in colonies like honeybees, but they've evolved a completely different way of dealing with threats. Instead of stingers, they have powerful mandibles and can produce irritating chemicals. Some species are so small they're called mosquito bees, while others are large enough to be mistaken for small wasps. Stingless bees create some of the most architecturally complex nests in the insect world. Their combs aren't the neat hexagons of honeybees, but rather intricate clusters of egg-shaped cells. They store their honey in special pot-like structures that look like tiny ceramic vessels. Some species build their colonies in tree hollows, others in the ground, and a few have learned to coexist with termites in their mounds. In Australia, you'll find the extraordinary blue-banded bees, whose males sleep in communal groups, hanging from plant stems by their mandibles. They look like tiny blue and white striped ornaments decorating the early morning garden. The females are powerful buzz pollinators, capable of working flowers that even bumblebees can't handle. The oil-collecting bees of South America have co-evolved with flowers that produce oils instead of nectar. These bees have specialized structures for collecting and storing these oils, which they use both as food and as construction material for their nests. It's a partnership so specific that neither the bees nor their flowers can survive without each other. Some of the most remarkable bees are the ones that have given up the typical bee lifestyle entirely. Cuckoo bees don't build nests or collect pollen. Instead, they're brood parasites, laying their eggs in the nests of other bee species. Like their bird namesakes, they let other parents do the hard work of raising their offspring. They've evolved to look remarkably similar to their host species, allowing them to sneak into nests undetected. Then there are the nocturnal bees species that have adapted to work night-blooming flowers. These bees have enlarged eyes and enhanced sensitivity to help them navigate and forage in near-complete darkness. They've found an ecological niche that's completely ignored by day-flying pollinators. In the cloud forests of Central America, you might encounter orchid bees males that collect fragrances from orchids and other flowers not for food, but to create complex perfume mixtures that they use to attract mates. Each male has his own signature scent blend, stored in special pouches on his legs. The relationship with orchids is so specific that some orchid species can only be pollinated by males of particular bee species who are attracted to their unique fragrances. What's remarkable about all this diversity is how each species has found its own way to make a living from flowers. Some are generalists, visiting whatever blooms are available. Others are specialists, sometimes depending on a single plant species for survival. Some work alone, others in small groups, and a few in massive societies. Some fly during the day, others at night. Some collect pollen on their legs, others on their bellies, and a few don't collect pollen at all. Yet despite all this variation, they all share that fundamental bee characteristic. They've all descended from those ancient wasps that discovered the sweetness of flowers and never looked back. Each species is a unique solution to the same basic challenge: how to make a living by connecting flowers with their need for reproduction. The result is a symphony of diversity that plays out in every ecosystem on Earth, from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests, from mountain meadows to desert oases. Every time you see a bee, whether it's a familiar honeybee, a fuzzy bumblebee, or some tiny metallic sweat bee you can barely identify, you're witnessing millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. Each one is perfectly adapted to its role in the intricate web of relationships that keeps our flowering world alive and beautiful. Ancient partnerships with humans. The relationship between humans and bees is one of our species' oldest partnerships, stretching back at least 9,000 years and probably much longer. Long before we learned to grow crops or domesticate animals, our ancestors were following honey guide birds through African forests and climbing towering cliffs in search of wild honey. The sweetness they found wasn't just a treat. It was often the only source of concentrated sugar available, making honey quite literally worth its weight in gold. The earliest evidence of this ancient partnership comes from cave paintings in Spain, dating back about 8,000 years. These remarkable images show figures climbing rope ladders to reach wild bee colonies, smoke trailing from torches used to calm the bees. The detail in these paintings is extraordinary. You can see the honey dripping from the combs, the swarm of bees around the honey hunter, and the careful way the climber approaches the precious hive. But it was in ancient Egypt that beekeeping first became a true science. Around 450 years ago, Egyptian beekeepers developed the first movable hives, cylindrical clay tubes, that could be stacked and transported as needed. They discovered that bees would readily occupy these artificial homes, and that honey production could be managed and improved through careful attention to the colony's needs. The Egyptians elevated honey to divine status. They believed that bees were born from the tears of the sun god Ra, and honey was considered the food of the gods. It was so valuable that it was used as currency. Wages were sometimes paid in honey, taxes could be settled with honey, and it was a standard offering in religious ceremonies. The process of mummification relied heavily on honey and beeswax, both for their preservative properties and their spiritual significance. Egyptian beekeeping was remarkably sophisticated. They developed techniques for managing multiple colonies, methods for extracting honey without destroying the entire comb, and even primitive queen breeding programs. They understood that colonies needed to be fed during lean times, that diseases could spread between hives, and that timing was crucial for honey harvests. Relief carvings from ancient temples show beekeepers using smoke to calm bees, wearing protective clothing, and using tools that are remarkably similar to modern beekeeping equipment. The Egyptians also figured out seasonal management on an impressive scale. They would load hundreds of hives onto boats and move them up and down the Nile River, following the blooming seasons of different crops. As flowers finished blooming in one area, the entire operation would be packed up and moved to where fresh nectar sources were available. It was transhumant beekeeping on a massive scale, and it allowed them to harvest honey almost year-round. As civilizations developed throughout the Mediterranean, honey and beeswax became increasingly important trade goods. The ancient Greeks considered honey to be ambrosia, the food of the gods, and they developed their own sophisticated beekeeping practices. Greek philosophers like Aristotle wrote extensively about bee behavior, and many of their observations were remarkably accurate. The Greeks also gave us some of our most enduring honey-related traditions. They believed that honey had medicinal properties. They weren't wrong, and they used it in everything from wound treatments to cough remedies. Greek athletes consumed honey before competitions, believing it would give them strength and endurance again, not far from the truth given honey's quick energy absorption. Roman beekeeping advanced the science even further. Writers like Virgil and Pliny the Elder produced detailed treatises on bee management that read like modern beekeeping manuals. They developed techniques for artificial swarming, described how to combine weak colonies with strong ones, and even experimented with different hive designs to improve honey production. The Romans also industrialized honey production in ways that wouldn't be seen again until modern times. Large estates might maintain hundreds of hives, and honey became a major agricultural product. Roman soldiers carried honey in their field rations, both for energy and for treating wounds. The phrase "land of milk and honey" comes from this period, describing regions so fertile and well managed that they produced both pastoral and agricultural abundance. But perhaps nowhere was the human-bee relationship more deeply embedded in culture than in medieval Europe. Monasteries became the centers of beekeeping knowledge, with monks maintaining detailed records of their colonies and developing new techniques for hive management. The abbey apiaries weren't just sources of honey. They were libraries of beekeeping wisdom, carefully preserved and passed down through generations of religious communities. Medieval beekeepers developed the skep, those iconic dome-shaped hives woven from straw that we still associate with traditional beekeeping. Skeps were works of art in their own right, carefully crafted to provide the perfect environment for bee colonies. Each one was unique, shaped by the hands of its maker, and designed to fit into the specific microclimate of its location. The medieval period also gave us some of our most charming bee-related traditions. Telling the bees was a widespread custom where important family news, deaths, births, marriages, was formally announced to the hive. People believed that bees were sensitive to the emotional state of their keepers, and that failing to keep them informed would cause the colony to sicken or swarm away. While this might seem like mere superstition, it actually reflects a deep understanding of how stress and disruption can affect bee colonies. Medieval European culture was saturated with bee symbolism. Bees represented industriousness, community cooperation, and divine order. The organization of a bee colony was seen as a perfect model for human society, with every individual playing their proper role for the good of the whole. This metaphor was so powerful that it influenced political theory, religious thought, and social organization for centuries. The medieval mead tradition deserves special mention. Mead, fermented honey wine, was the drink of heroes in Norse and Celtic cultures. The process of making mead was considered almost magical, transforming the pure sweetness of honey into something that could alter consciousness and bring people closer to the divine. Great halls would ring with the sounds of celebration, fueled by horns of golden mead. When European colonists arrived in the Americas, they brought their bees with them. Native Americans had never seen honeybees before, and they called them white man's flies, recognizing that their arrival often preceded European settlement. The bees adapted quickly to their new environment, sometimes establishing wild colonies that spread faster than the human settlements that had brought them. This introduction had profound ecological impacts. American wildflowers, which had evolved without bee pollinators, suddenly found themselves with new partners. Some thrived with this additional pollination, while others struggled to compete for the attention of these efficient new visitors. The landscape itself began to change. as European bees helped spread both native and introduced plant species. In other parts of the world, different traditions developed around different species of bees. In Nepal and other parts of the Himalayas, honey hunters still practice one of the most dangerous forms of foraging on Earth. They climb down sheer cliff faces on rope ladders, using smoke and traditional tools to harvest honey from giant bee colonies that build their combs on exposed rock faces hundreds of feet above the ground. These Himalayan honey hunters are carrying on a tradition that's probably thousands of years old. The honey they harvest, particularly from higher elevations, is prized for its medicinal properties and unique flavors. The process is incredibly dangerous and requires tremendous skill and courage. The hunters must read the behavior of the bees, time their raids for optimal conditions, and navigate treacherous cliff faces while dealing with swarms of defensive bees. In parts of Africa, traditional honey hunters still follow honey guide birds, remarkable creatures that have co-evolved with humans to lead them to bee colonies. The relationship is truly mutualistic. The birds locate the hives but can't access them alone, while the humans can harvest the honey but might never find the well-hidden colonies without guidance. After the harvest, the humans traditionally leave behind wax and bee larvae for their feathered partners. These ancient partnerships remind us that our relationship with bees isn't just about modern agriculture or commercial honey production. It's a connection that goes back to our earliest days as a species, woven into our myths, our religions, our economics, and our understanding of how the natural world works. Every time you drizzle honey onto your toast, you're participating in a relationship that has shaped human culture for millennia. The knowledge accumulated over thousands of years of beekeeping, the understanding of bee behavior, seasonal management, disease prevention, and honey production, forms the foundation of modern apiculture. But it's also a reminder of how deeply our species is connected to the natural world, and how our survival and prosperity have always depended on our ability to work with, rather than against, the other creatures that share our planet. Modern mysteries and challenges. Just as we thought we had figured out the ancient art of beekeeping, the 21st century presented us with mysteries that have shaken our understanding of these remarkable creatures. The most dramatic and troubling of these began appearing in the mid-2000s, when beekeepers started finding something that seemed impossible: hives that were suddenly, inexplicably empty. Picture a beekeeper opening a hive on what should be a routine inspection. The boxes are heavy with honey and pollen, the comb looks perfect, there might even be developing larvae in their cells. But the adult bees, the thousands of workers that should be bustling through the frames, are simply gone. Not dead on the bottom board, not clustered somewhere in the hive, just vanished. Even stranger, other bees seem reluctant to raid these abandoned hives, as if they sense some invisible danger. This phenomenon, which scientists named colony collapse disorder or CCD, spread through apiaries like a ghost story come to life. Beekeepers who had managed healthy colonies for decades suddenly found themselves losing 30, 50, sometimes 90% of their hives over a single winter. The economic impact was staggering, billions of dollars in losses, but the ecological implications were even more frightening. The search for answers led researchers down a rabbit hole of interconnected problems that revealed just how complex and fragile the modern bees world has become. It wasn't just one thing causing colonies to collapse. It was everything at once, a perfect storm of stresses that was pushing these ancient survivors past their breaking point. Pesticides emerged as one of the primary suspects, but not in the way you might expect. The problems weren't necessarily from pesticides that killed bees outright. Those effects were obvious and avoidable. Instead, it was the subtle, sublethal effects of chemicals that were proving most insidious. Neonicotinoid pesticides, for instance, don't usually kill bees directly, but they can impair their navigation abilities, weaken their immune systems, and affect their learning and memory. Imagine a forager bee that has been exposed to sublethal levels of these chemicals. She might successfully find a patch of flowers and collect nectar, but on the flight home, her internal GPS starts malfunctioning. She knows she needs to get back to her hive. She can sense it's in the right general direction, but she can't quite find it. She circles, searching, burning through her precious fuel load, growing weaker with each passing minute. Eventually, she simply doesn't have the energy to continue searching and dies somewhere in the landscape, her sisters never knowing what happened to her. Multiply this story by thousands of foragers, and you begin to understand how a seemingly healthy colony can suddenly lose its workforce. The bees aren't dying in the hive, they're getting lost and dying alone in the fields, unable to find their way home. But pesticides are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Modern beekeeping faces challenges that didn't exist even a generation ago. Industrial agriculture has created vast monocultures where bees might find abundant food for a few weeks during bloom time, but nothing at all for the rest of the season. It's like living in a city where all the restaurants are only open for 1 week out of the year. These agricultural deserts force bees to work much harder for their food. A colony that once might have foraged within a mile or two of home now needs to send workers 5 or 6 miles to find adequate nutrition. The energy costs are enormous, and the stress on individual bees is compounded by the fact that they're not getting the diverse diet they need for optimal health. Climate change has added another layer of complexity. Flowering times are shifting, sometimes dramatically. Plants that once bloomed in perfect sequence, providing a continuous flow of resources throughout the season, are now flowering at unpredictable times. Spring might arrive weeks early, catching bee colonies before they've built up their populations. Late freezes can destroy fruit tree blossoms after colonies have already started their spring buildup, leaving them with hungry mouths to feed and no food coming in. The warming climate has also allowed diseases and parasites to expand their ranges and extend their active seasons. Varroa mites, tiny parasites that attach to adult bees and feed on their blood, have become the single greatest threat to managed bee colonies worldwide. These mites are like vampires, slowly weakening their hosts while spreading deadly viruses throughout the colony. The relationship between varroa mites and viral diseases is particularly devastating. The mites act as vectors, spreading viruses from bee to bee as they feed. Deformed wing virus, which was once a minor problem, has become a major killer in mite-infested colonies. Affected bees emerge from their cells with crumpled, useless wings, unable to fly or contribute to the colony's work. A hive dealing with both mites and viruses is fighting a war on multiple fronts, and too often it's a war they can't win. Perhaps most troubling of all is the recognition that many of our modern beekeeping practices, developed with the best of intentions, may have inadvertently made these problems worse. Moving hives long distances for pollination services. A practice called migratory beekeeping exposes colonies to new diseases and stresses them with constant transportation. Feeding bees sugar water when natural nectar sources are scarce might keep them alive, but it doesn't provide the complex nutrition they've evolved to need. The genetic diversity of managed bee populations has also narrowed considerably. Commercial queen breeding programs, while producing bees with desirable traits like gentleness and honey production, may have inadvertently reduced the genetic variation that helps populations adapt to new challenges. Wild bee populations, which once provided an infusion of genetic diversity, have declined dramatically in many areas. Yet even as we've cataloged these challenges, we've also witnessed some remarkable innovations and adaptations. Urban beekeeping has experienced a renaissance, with city rooftops and community gardens providing surprisingly good habitat for bee colonies. Cities often have more diverse flowering plants than rural agricultural areas, and the year-round blooming season can actually be longer and more reliable than what's available in farming regions. Treatment-free beekeeping has emerged as both a philosophy and a practice, with some beekeepers deliberately selecting for colonies that can survive without chemical treatments. These bees might not produce as much honey, and the losses can be heartbreaking. But the survivors are developing resistance to mites and diseases that could prove crucial for long-term bee health. Researchers have also made remarkable discoveries about bee immunity and disease resistance. We now know that bees practice a form of social immunity, where the entire colony works together to prevent and control diseases. They use propolis as an antimicrobial coating, practice sophisticated hygiene behaviors, and can even detect and remove diseased larvae before problems spread. Some of the most promising developments are coming from unexpected directions. Researchers have discovered that certain mushroom extracts can boost bee immunity and help colonies fight off viral infections. Others are working on breeding programs that select for traits like mite grooming behavior, where bees learn to detect and remove parasites from their sisters. The precision agriculture revolution is also beginning to benefit bees. GPS-guided spraying systems can avoid applying pesticides when and where bees are active. Cover crops planted between agricultural seasons provide food sources during critical periods. Some farmers are even setting aside portions of their land specifically for pollinator habitat, recognizing that healthy bee populations are essential for their own success. Perhaps most importantly, there's a growing recognition that bee health isn't separate from environmental health. They're the same thing. The problems facing bees are symptoms of broader ecological disruptions that affect everything from soil microbiomes to bird populations to human health. Solving the bee crisis requires thinking about agriculture, urban planning, chemical regulation, and land use in completely integrated ways. The story of modern bee challenges is ultimately a story about resilience, both theirs and ours. These ancient creatures have survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and countless other catastrophes over their 130 million year history. The challenges they face today are severe, but they're not insurmountable. Every healthy hive, every successful queen, every new generation of disease-resistant bees is a reminder that adaptation and survival are what bees do best. As we learn more about what bees need to thrive, we're also learning about what we need to create truly sustainable agricultural and urban systems. In helping bees, we're helping ourselves, continuing a partnership that has enriched both our species for thousands of years. The healing powers. For as long as humans have been harvesting honey, we've recognized that bees produce more than just sweetness. They create medicine. The healing properties of bee products have been documented in virtually every culture that has encountered these remarkable insects, and modern science is finally beginning to understand the sophisticated chemistry behind folk wisdom that goes back thousands of years. Let's start with honey itself, that golden elixir that never spoils and seems almost too good to be true. When you examine honey under a microscope, you begin to understand why ancient peoples considered it magical. It's not just concentrated sugar. It's a complex pharmacy of enzymes, organic acids, minerals, vitamins, and antimicrobial compounds, all working together in ways that synthetic medicine is still trying to replicate. The antimicrobial properties of honey come from several sources. First, its low water activity creates an environment where most bacteria and fungi simply can't survive. They literally dehydrate when they encounter honey's concentrated sugars. But honey also contains hydrogen peroxide, produced when glucose oxidase, an enzyme added by bees, reacts with glucose in the presence of water. This creates a gentle, continuous antiseptic action that can persist for hours. Perhaps most remarkably, honey has what scientists call osmotic pressure effects. When applied to wounds, honey draws moisture from bacterial cells, while simultaneously drawing healing fluids to the wound site. It's like having a smart bandage that knows exactly how much moisture to remove and how much to provide. Medical-grade honey, particularly Manuka honey from New Zealand, has been approved by health authorities worldwide for wound treatment. Hospitals now use honey-impregnated dressings for everything from surgical wounds to diabetic ulcers that won't heal with conventional treatments. The honey doesn't just prevent infection. It actually promotes healing by stimulating tissue growth and reducing inflammation. But honey's medicinal properties extend far beyond wound care. For centuries, people have used honey for coughs and throat irritation, and research has shown that honey can be as effective as over-the-counter cough suppressants, especially for children. The viscous nature of honey coats irritated tissues, while its antimicrobial properties help fight the underlying infections that cause cough and sore throat. Then there's royal jelly, perhaps the most mysterious of all bee products. This creamy, protein-rich substance is produced by nurse bees specifically to feed developing queens, and it's responsible for one of the most dramatic transformations in nature. A larva destined to become a worker bee can be transformed into a queen simply by receiving royal jelly throughout her development, instead of switching to regular honey and pollen after 3 days. This transformation isn't just about size, it's a complete genetic reprogramming that affects lifespan, reproductive capacity, behavior, and even brain structure. A worker bee lives for about 6 weeks during active season, while a queen can live for several years. A worker bee's ovaries remain undeveloped, while a queen becomes capable of laying thousands of eggs. It's epigenetics in action, the same DNA expressing completely different outcomes based entirely on diet. Human cultures have long believed that if royal jelly can create queens from ordinary larvae, it might have similar transformative effects on human health. Ancient Chinese medicine has used royal jelly for over 2,000 years, and it remains a popular supplement today. Modern research has found that royal jelly does contain unique compounds, including proteins and fatty acids that don't exist in other foods. Some studies suggest it may have anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, and immune-boosting properties, though the science is still developing. Propolis, that sticky tree resin that bees collect and modify into bee glue, has an equally impressive medicinal history. Ancient Egyptians used propolis in their mummification process, recognizing its preservative and antimicrobial properties. Greek physicians used it to treat wounds and infections. Medieval European monks applied propolis to everything from cuts to tooth pain. Modern analysis reveals that propolis is incredibly complex chemically. It can contain over 300 different compounds, varying depending on the local plant sources the bees visit. These compounds include flavonoids, phenolic acids, and essential oils that work synergistically to create powerful antimicrobial, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory effects. Research has shown that propolis can be effective against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and even some parasites. It's particularly interesting to researchers because many pathogenic microorganisms seem unable to develop resistance to propolis, possibly because it contains such a complex mixture of active compounds. Some studies suggest that propolis might even have anti-cancer properties, though much more research is needed. Brazilian green propolis, collected from bees that visit a specific type of rosemary, has become particularly prized for its medicinal properties. The unique compounds in this propolis appear to have especially strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Bee pollen, often called nature's multivitamin, has been consumed as a health food for centuries. Pollen is the male reproductive material of flowers, and it's incredibly nutrient-dense. It has to be, since it contains everything needed to create new plant life. Bees collect pollen not just as a protein source, but also for its vitamins, minerals, enzymes, and beneficial fatty acids. Athletes have long sworn by bee pollen as a natural performance enhancer, claiming it increases energy and endurance. While the scientific evidence for dramatic performance benefits is limited, pollen is undeniably nutritious. It contains all the essential amino acids humans need, plus vitamins, minerals, and bioactive compounds that may support immune function and overall health. Some of the most fascinating modern research involves bee pollen's potential effects on allergies. Counterintuitively, consuming small amounts of local bee pollen, which contains traces of the same pollens that cause seasonal allergies, might help some people build tolerance to environmental allergens. It's a kind of natural immunotherapy, though people with severe pollen allergies should be extremely cautious about trying this approach. Perhaps the most controversial bee product in terms of medicinal use is bee venom itself. Apitherapy, the medicinal use of bee venom, has practitioners around the world who swear by its effectiveness for conditions ranging from arthritis to multiple sclerosis. The treatment involves deliberately allowing bees to sting specific points on the body, or receiving injections of purified bee venom. Bee venom contains over 40 different compounds, including melatonin, which is responsible for much of the pain and inflammation of a bee sting. But in controlled doses, some of these compounds may have therapeutic effects. Melatonin has been shown to have anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving properties in laboratory studies, and some research suggests it might help with certain autoimmune conditions. The science behind apitherapy is still developing, and it's definitely not without risks. Some people have severe allergic reactions to bee venom. But there's growing scientific interest in understanding how the complex chemistry of bee venom might be harnessed for legitimate medical treatments. Beyond the direct medicinal uses, there's something therapeutic about simply observing bees at work. Many beekeepers report that working with their hives has a meditative, calming effect. There's something about the rhythmic humming of a healthy colony, the deliberate movements of forager bees, the ancient patterns of behavior playing out exactly as they have for millions of years, that seems to slow down our modern world and connect us with something deeper and more permanent. This isn't just romantic imagination. Research has shown that spending time in nature, engaging in repetitive, purposeful activities, and connecting with other living beings can have measurable effects on stress hormones, blood pressure, and mental health. Beekeeping combines all of these therapeutic elements. Some programs now use beekeeping as therapy for veterans with PTSD, people recovering from addiction, and individuals dealing with anxiety and depression. The bees don't care about human problems. They simply continue their ancient work, and somehow their focus and purposefulness can be contagious. The healing powers of bees remind us that medicine doesn't always come from laboratories and pharmaceutical companies. Sometimes it comes from understanding and working with natural systems that have been perfecting their chemistry for millions of years. The bees in your garden aren't just collecting nectar and pollen. They're participating in one of nature's most sophisticated pharmaceutical operations, creating medicines that have served both their own species and ours for millennia. As we face challenges with antibiotic resistance and the need for new approaches to healing, perhaps it's time to look more seriously at what these master chemists have been trying to teach us all along. The solutions to some of our health challenges might be buzzing around in our own backyards, waiting for us to pay attention to the wisdom that's been there all along. As we reach the end of our journey through the world of bees, it's remarkable to realize just how much these small creatures have shaped our planet and our lives. From their ancient evolution alongside flowering plants to their complex social societies, from their mathematical precision in building honeycombs to their sophisticated communication systems, bees represent one of nature's most successful experiments in cooperation, efficiency, and adaptation. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, Perhaps you'll listen for the gentle hum that means all is well in the world around you. Remember that somewhere nearby, thousands of tiny architects are working through the darkness, tending their young, processing tomorrow's honey, and continuing a dance of survival that connects us all to the sweet, interconnected web of life on Earth. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining me on another Midnight Deep Dive.